Hi folks, and welcome to Philosophy According to Eddie, and today we're going to be looking at gender and society. Now, in recent times, but particularly over the course of the 20th century and into the 21st century, traditional ideas around gender have changed. When we say traditional views, we're talking about the 20th century Western middle class view that you have a man, a woman, and children within a family, that men and women have roles within society and roles within the family that are different to each other. Now, all this has changed with re-understanding of gender identity in terms of its fluidity and its transitional nature, and also the roles of genders within society and within families. These have changed, and Christianity has had to respond to this changing world. The traditional ideas that came from the Bible in Ephesians 5:21-33, and the carrying on of that tradition in the Mulieris Dignitatem, which is a Catholic paper, chapters 18 to 19, these have had to be re-understood. So these traditional Christian ideas have had to be reimagined. And Christianity has had to respond to secular society, i.e. non-religious society, about the role of motherhood and of parenthood in general, of non-traditional families, and of feminism. Feminism has grown, particularly throughout the 20th century, and especially since the second wave of feminism in the 60s and 70s, and this has informed a lot of Christian thinking. We're going to have a look at Ephesians 5:21-33, see how that links in, as well as the Mulieris Dignitatem. We're going to look at the criticisms from Taylor, Frieden, de Beauvoir and Foucault, and also the reimaginings from Bernard, Halkus, Gebara and Bingamer. Another issue that the Church has had to deal with, and society in general, is the idea of sex versus gender. There has traditionally been this view that sex and gender are the same thing, that you are male according to your body, and that you are male according to your understanding of yourself, which is your gender. The sex is the biological side, the gender is the identity side. And essentialists still believe this idea that gender is intrinsic within your body. So gender is like the soul, and sex is the body. So your gender sits inside your sex, and men and women are different, they are fundamentally different, and their genders reflect that. An existentialist, however, suggests, yes, you have got this body which has a sex to it, it's either male, female, hermaphrodite, or sort of various aspects within that, but that you also have a gender which is socially constructed. It is not anything to do with the biology. And so the gender could be anything, but it sits inside your body regardless of what it considers itself to be. The existentialist idea is becoming much more popular. Essentialist ideas do still exist, but the weight of movement is against them. And so therefore, when it comes to talking about gender in society, we are not just talking about men and women as male and female, we are talking about a whole range of different gender identities, not necessarily concurrent with the bodies in which they sit. And this has been a challenge to the Church, as has the idea of gender-power relations. And this is the idea that sexuality and gender is used in power relationships between people. Michel Foucault, who was a French sociologist and philosopher, he talked about the control of sexual practices as being, or the scientia sexualis, as being the way in which society controls, or institutions control people, by saying, this is the right way to understand your sexuality, this is the wrong way. And he preferred to talk about sexuality rather than gender because at the time ideas of gender fluidity hadn't really come about. But the implication is that as he saw it, sexuality, homosexuality, heterosexuality, bisexuality was not linked to being male or female. So we can extend that to gender as well. So the suggestion here is that there is a masculine male, so masculine gender, male-bodied, dominated society which controls those of different genders and sexualities, and that the church traditionally has applied that power as well, particularly in its teachings around homosexuality and other ideas of gender there. So Christianity has had to respond to this, it's had to work with these two big challenges, and that's what we're going to be looking at for the rest of the video. Biblical teachings on sex and gender are a little mixed, to be honest. They are not that straightforward. Most of the views come from Genesis, Galatians and Ephesians 5:21 to 33, but we will be including some other ideas as well. The traditional views tend to be from Genesis 1 and 3, that men and women are created to procreate by God, so men and women are made for each other to have children. And that's Genesis 1, and that men and women were given roles by God when they were cast out of the Garden of Eden in Genesis 3. However, later on in the Bible, in Jeremiah 31, the covenant with God was emphasised as being the most important thing, not what you were like on the outside, and we would assume gender and sexuality being part of that, possibly sex as well. That the covenant with God meant that your order was based, so the order of society was based on the content of your heart, your relationships with God, and that was what made you either better or worse in society, not whether you were male or female or anything else. Also, as you'll know from the Jesus as Liberator, Son of God or Teacher of Wisdom video, that Jesus did act as a liberator for women, and in the story of Martha and Mary, Luke 10:38 to 42, Martha and Mary show different roles. Mary sits with Jesus while Martha occupies a more traditional role. They're both women though, and it's about being close to Jesus, being close to God, or about not being close to Jesus and close to God. That's what's important, not the gender or the sex. Also, Galatians 3:27 to 28, there is no longer male and female when you are in Jesus Christ's church, according to St. Paul. Now, obviously, we're taking this literally, and we shouldn't take it literally. He probably wasn't really saying that. But it's an interesting point that's being made. We can guess he's probably not saying that because of later things that St. Paul says that we will address. Ephesians 5 is a little more tricky. It's the household rules, and this is quite a common thing to do in the Roman and the Greek ancient world, to have rules about what different genders should do. In Ephesians 5:22, the husband is described as head of the wife, just as Christ is the head of the church. Now immediately that's suggesting male dominance, and that's how it's often been interpreted. However, the Greek word kephale, meaning head, doesn't just mean the literal head. It can mean ruler, as you'd expect there, head of the wife, husband rules over the wife. But it can also mean the life source. So this would be the emphasis back on the relationship, that the head provides the life source to the body. And we look later on, and the body is referred to as being special in its own right, and the woman is seen as the body, the man is seen as the head. Now, it's not perfect. It's still suggesting that the head is. We all know that the head is the most, with the brain is like the leading part of the body, but it's not quite as iron-fisted as it might have initially have seemed. Ephesians 5:25, husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So this does seem again to be emphasising the relationship again. That it's about husband and wife together, and they're both providing something in this relationship. But it's still quite patriarchal. It's still suggesting male power exists over women. This idea of, look after women. Men are in charge of the women to look after them. And we see that in 1 Corinthians 14, 34 and 36, where St. Paul suggests that women shouldn't talk in church and should be educated at home. And the same in 1 Timothy 2, which is St. Paul's letter to Timothy, where he reiterates this view. Now this is St. Paul's view, not Jesus' view, let's remember. Corinthians, Timothy, Galatians, they are all letters from St. Paul, not Jesus himself. So we could argue that the message from Jesus is that of liberation. But there are nonetheless biblical texts which suggest that there is a power relationship between men and women, and this needs to be resolved by the church in order to understand it better in society. So how have Christians responded? Well, we're going to look at 4 approaches. We're going to look at conservative Protestants, liberal Protestants, Roman Catholics and liberal Catholics. So conservative Protestants are generally resistant to secular ideas. They sometimes are biblicists, not always though, but they tend to be very traditional. Kathy Rudy has done a lot of work on the links between conservative Protestantism and the right in America. So first off, with gender roles, they are not happy with feminism and secularism. They believe that they lead to disorder, and that men and women are equal but different, and that Genesis 1:27 backs this up. In terms of parenthood, mothers should be caregivers. Mothers are based on Eve, who was the mother of all living, according to Genesis 3:20. The woman should therefore be there to create the domestic haven, and to do the primary caring. They can work, but only if it doesn't interfere with their role as a mother. And men act as workers to support the family. In terms of families, they're generally unhappy with anything except a 2-parent, heterosexual, married couple. The only exception to that is if one of the parents has died, at which point that's the only form of single parent family that would be acceptable. Single parents who are unmarried, cohabitation, homosexual couples, blended families, where you've got stepchildren and such, no go. Cohabitation and homosexuality are considered to be eroticising in terms of the role of what a couple is there for. A couple is there to be committed and to create a family, not to be overcome by the passions. So, overall, old-fashioned traditional approaches tend to be very much based on a traditional understanding of the Bible. However, this is quite different to the liberal Protestant approach. Liberal Protestants tend to be focused more on the idea of covenant. They see the Bible as a collection of experiences aiding us in making that covenant with God. And it's not about gender or sex as much as it is about making sure that you're fulfilling the principles that God would want. So, on that basis, they're more tolerant than the conservative Protestants. In terms of gender roles, they are open to feminist ideas of new gender roles and the issues that Foucault described around power being applied to people. They think people should be free to make their own decisions, to create that biblical covenant. They still wish to avoid eroticisation, i.e. focusing just on the lust of relationships. But any relationship that's based on philos and agape, so that's more sort of the love of friendship and the self-sacrificing love, as well as the eros. There's a place for eros as well, the erotic love. If a relationship is based on all of those, it doesn't matter what it is well, it doesn't matter who loves each other, and and it doesn't matter what you're doing in society. So they would still probably frown on sex work or anything that is exploitative, but nonetheless, men and women would be equally judged for what they do. Parenthood. Good or bad parents are genderless. It doesn't matter. You can be a good parent and be male, female, other, neither, and you can be a bad parent in just the same way. And they wish to avoid, the liberal Protestants wish to avoid the false consciousness that Simone de Beauvoir talked about, because it suggests that as a woman you are naturally going to be a good parent. Not necessarily. You might have to look at yourself and go, I'm going to be a lousy parent regardless of my gender, or I'm going to be a good parent regardless of my gender. And it's about that covenant, doing what's right for God, right for society. And in terms of families, they're very critical of the Conservatives, and particularly building on the ideas of Jesse Bernard in 1972, who suggested that marriage tends to benefit men over women in traditional relationships. A liberal Protestant would suggest that a good family is one that provides good care, doing the best for relationships, doing best for God. And therefore, it could be anyone. It could be any type of family, blended family, homosexual family, single parent, doesn't matter as long as they're doing the right thing. So this is much more compatible with feminism and with secularism. In Roman Catholicism, there is an ambiguity around the issue of men and women. They are all in favour of the dignity of women, because of course Mary is very important. Mary, Mother of Christ, is very important in Catholicism. But they feel that feminism has got a secular agenda which actually harms the key tenets of Christianity. And in the Mulieris Dignitatem, which was a letter from Pope John Paul II, Mary was outlined as the God-bearer, Theotokos, which means God-bearer, and therefore women had a special role within society. In terms of their gender roles, men and women are equal in their likeness of God, so male and female are equal. This idea of the man being the head doesn't mean that he's in charge. Women have a special role as well, they are equal in Christ. However, there is a form of essentialism here. It is man and woman, and no flexibility there. Women cannot take on male roles according to Mulieris Dignitatem, because they are different, they're fundamentally different. So there are some roles which can be occupied by women and some roles which can't, in the same way that there are some roles, such as being a mother, that cannot be taken on by men. And speaking of being a mother, on the subject of parenthood, Mulieris Dignitatem goes into this in great detail. There's a unique role of woman as mother. Men can't be mothers, so it's their unique role, it's a special role. Mary's annunciation, i.e. the accepting of Christ, the divine conception, it's a model for motherhood in general. Mary accepting she's going to be the mother of the world, essentially. There's the mystery of generation, in which men and women are different. We don't know why, but they are. That children are a special gift, and this is linked to Mark 10:8, which referred to husband and wife being of one flesh in creating the child. There is a mutuality though. Women become role models to men, and they provide their own special insights, equal insights. And in fact, as an active mother, in active motherhood, women have to guide men because men are not naturally predisposed to be parents, according to Mulieris Dignitatem. So women aren't just passive, they're not being led, they are giving something that only they can give, and it's equal to men, and they are equal in this relationship. In terms of families, intact families are what people are going for in Roman Catholicism. So, cohabitation is acceptable as like a trial run for marriage and being in a family, but no sex outside of marriage, and marriage has to be strictly heterosexual. Now, this puts Catholicism, Roman Catholicism, up against feminism in terms of false consciousness, this false belief that women have this set role. And so they're always going to be up against each other. There's no real easy way to resolve that, and no one's found one yet. Catholic feminists respond to Roman Catholicism by suggesting, yes, the Church is patriarchal, but it's not too broken to fix. Christianity can do better than secularism. It can provide something that secularism can't, but it does need to be reimagined. In terms of gender roles, Fiorenza recognises the significance of women in the Bible. Priscilla in Acts 18, Phoebe in Romans 16, Aphia in Philemon 1. These are all great women who lead and show that women have got a significance beyond being mothers. They have got a special role to play, and suggest a sisterly solidarity, that women should join together and see their role. And so in a sense they're quite compatible with secular feminists, this idea of getting women beyond the patriarchal bias of the Church. They also reject this idea of men being the head, that actually this is a patriarchal issue, and that men should reject this patriarchy as well. This is what Halkis suggests, that men should reject the patriarchy in order to give women that chance to fulfil their roles, which is very much in keeping with the ideas of secularism and secular feminism. In terms of parenthood, Catholic feminists believe that it should be an option, not a burden. That women are more than just mothers, they should be able to choose. And this idea in Mulieris that they are defined as mothers actually just instills the patriarchal bias. Women are more than mothers. They can be mothers if they wish. And that means in terms of families, women shouldn't feel like they have to become mothers, but they also shouldn't feel like they have to have a husband. Mary, particularly in Brazilian Catholicism, South American Catholicism as well, in general, Mary is not seen as being this pure, perfect virgin with God as the Father. No, Mary is a failed single parent. She could have been married as she was a young, fertile woman, but she wasn't. She failed according to the rules of the time, and therefore she just got on with it. She was living with the reality of this failure, and she still became the mother of God and this saint. So for single women, particularly in South America, for whom being a single parent is just a matter of course, they see Mary as being this role model of a failed single parent who carries on anyway. And Guevara and Bingamer support this idea. They put this idea forward. So this is quite closely aligned with secular feminism. However, they feel within Catholic feminism that there is something special in terms of women in the Bible. It gives them more than just a secular role, that there is actually a holy role for women in society. So there you have it. We've looked at gender in society, we've looked at how society has changed with secular ideas of feminism and gender roles changing our understanding of what it means to be male, female, or something else altogether. And we've looked at how the Church has tried to respond to this from a conservative and liberal Protestant approach, and also a Roman Catholic and Catholic feminist approach. If you've got any questions, of course, get in touch. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and see you next time. Women shouldn't see themselves as just being mothers.
Oh, blinking heck, sorry Andy, I just about to lock up.
It's alright, I'm nearly done.
I apologise, I bet that didn't help you, did it?
Catholic feminists respond to the Roman Catholic approach by suggesting that the Church is patriarchal.